Studio-managed image control shaped entire eras of Hollywood, but the biggest edits didn't happen in film reels. They happened in medical reports that were trimmed, withheld, or explained away. These cases show how far the system went to control the narrative. Thelma Todd's missing findings. Monday, the 16th of December, 1935. A maid unlocks a garage on a hill above the Pacific Coast Highway. Inside a chocolate-brown Lincoln, Thelma Todd sits slumped behind the wheel in an evening gown and mink wrap. She is 29, and she is not breathing. Police arrive fast. Reporters arrive faster. Todd is not some fading extra. She is the Ice Cream Blonde, a comedy lead with Marx Brothers credits in her own busy cafe down the hill. Early word to the press is simple and neat. The car was running. The garage was closed. The cause looks like carbon monoxide. Investigators retrace her last weekend. On Saturday night, she attends a party at the Trocadero on Sunset. She laughs with friends. She has a tense moment with ex-husband Pat DiCicco, who has a rough reputation, but her group later tells police she leaves in good spirits. Around 3 in the morning on Sunday, her driver drops her at the steps below the cafe. That is the last confirmed sighting while she is alive. The autopsy confirms carbon monoxide in her blood. The coroner notes alcohol and a small bruise on her lip. Official testimony says there are no clear marks of a beating. The inquest jury hears that she may have started the car to warm herself after being locked out of her apartment. That simple story suits the studio. It also suits the cafe's backer, director Roland West, whose name is already tangled with hers. Outside the hearing room, the details turn less neat. Some friends claim Todd spoke with them by phone on Sunday at a time when the official estimate says she was already gone. West's estranged wife, Jewel Carmen, tells a grand jury she saw Todd driving on Hollywood Boulevard that same night. Those stories clash with the coroner's timeline and are never fully resolved. Rumors move through Los Angeles. People talk about pressure from gang figures. They talk about plans to push gambling in the cafe. They repeat stories of Todd telling friends she felt watched and under strain. None of that appears on the death certificate. Carole Landis's altered scene. Hollywood gossip columns had chased Carole Landis for years before that final holiday weekend in 1948. She was only 29, with a string of studio pictures behind her and a very public affair with British actor Rex Harrison running alongside his marriage to Lily Palmer. The setup was already messy before anyone touched a pill bottle. On the night of the 4th of July, Landis and Harrison have dinner at her Pacific Palisades house on Capri Drive. Friends later say she was desperate for a clear answer about their future. He goes home to his wife after midnight. She stays behind, surrounded by unpaid bills, fading offers, and a medicine cabinet full of Seconal. The next afternoon, Harrison returns to the house. Landis is on the bathroom floor. The bottle is nearby. Her pulse feels faint or gone, depending on which account you read. This is the key moment. Instead of calling an ambulance, Harrison starts looking for her private doctor. He tries to contain the scene, not broadcast it. Precious time slides away while he makes calls and then leaves the house. The maid is the one who finally brings in help. She alerts a neighbor. The neighbor calls police. By the time authorities arrive, there is no pulse to save. Landis is pronounced dead. The coroner later records barbiturate poisoning from an overdose of Seconal and rules the case a suicide. She has more than enough pills in her system to erase any doubt about intent. What happened inside the house before officers showed up becomes the real knot. Biographers report that Harrison was given a stack of personal letters Landis had kept, and that he burned them soon after. Relatives and some reporters insist there was a second handwritten note addressed to him that vanished. At the inquest, he calmly denies knowing anything about another note or any clear motive for her decision. Gene Tierney's silent infection. Spring 1943, Hollywood Canteen. Crowds of service members line up for a chance to see movie stars in person. Gene Tierney works the room in gloves and a careful smile. One woman later boasts that she slipped out of a quarantine ward to meet her. That fan has rubella. Tierney is pregnant. No one connects those dots yet. Months later, her daughter Daria is born in New York. The baby does not cry the way doctors expect. Tests begin. The diagnosis list grows longer each week. Partial blindness, serious hearing loss. Severe developmental delays. The phrase congenital rubella syndrome enters Tierney's life and never leaves. Studios see the danger right away. A story about a star catching an infection from a war bond event is bad publicity in the middle of World War II. Publicists steer questions away from medical details and toward vague phrases about a delicate child. Fans read about a nursery. They do not read about the hospital wing that will become Daria's long-term home. Tierney keeps working. She makes Laura and Leave Her to Heaven with that weight in the background. On set, she looks composed. At home, friends notice sleepless nights, sudden mood swings, sharp drops in energy. She visits Daria in a special care facility and returns to long days under hot lights. No one from the studio invites reporters to follow her there. By the early 1950s, the strain catches up. Tierney's depression deepens. She hears voices, feels watched, and fears she will harm her child. Doctors prescribe medication, then suggest shock treatments. She is admitted to clinics more than once. Public statements call it exhaustion and nervous trouble, say phrases that float above the real diagnoses. The fan who broke quarantine finally appears in Tierney's life again, not in a hospital waiting room, but in an autograph line. She proudly tells the actress she once slipped out of a contagious ward just to see her at the canteen. Tierney later writes that she could barely respond. For years, the infection, the disabled child, and the psychiatric care sit behind a curtain of polite studio language. Margaret Sullavan's hearing collapse. In the late 1930s, directors love Margaret Sullavan for her timing. She hits cues with exact precision. Off camera, she leans in and asks people to repeat themselves. At first, everyone thinks she is joking. The jokes stop as her hearing grows worse. She lives with otosclerosis, a hereditary condition that hardens the tiny bones in the ear. Conversations blur. Stage directions turn into guesses. On film sets, she starts asking for fewer takes, not because she is lazy, but because she is straining to match lines she cannot fully hear. The studios do not rush to share this. Publicity teams protect her image as a sharp, witty star. Any mention of health is wrapped in soft words like tired or overworked. When she pulls back from certain projects, the official reason is always scheduling or creative choice, never the quiet reality that she cannot clearly hear the people standing beside her. At home, the pressure builds. She raises 3 children, copes with multiple marriages, and fights constant ringing in her ears. Doctors experiment with treatments. Some visits help for a while, others make things worse. As hearing fades, misunderstandings multiply. Friends describe outbursts and sudden mood swings, the kind that often ride on top of untreated sensory loss. By the 1950s, she works less on screen. Pills appear on the nightstand. Sedatives for sleep, tablets for tension. The line between treatment and dependence blurs. These prescriptions show up later in the toxicology report. They do not show up in the glossy studio magazines that still run her old portraits. On January 1, 1960, she is found in her New Haven home after an overdose of barbiturates. The coroner rules the death acute barbiturate poisoning and lists it as self-inflicted. Newspapers call it a tragedy and hint at emotional problems, but the deep, long fight with hearing loss stays in the background. Dorothy Dandridge's hidden pain. Spotlights hit the stage in Las Vegas, and Dorothy Dandridge moves like nothing hurts. The gown fits tight, the hair is perfect, The smile lands on every table. Off stage, she walks with a careful step. Years earlier, a bad fall in a nightclub left her with a damaged foot and lasting pain. It never fully heals. Work does not stop to wait for it. Dandridge pushes through rehearsals, club sets, and film shoots, while that injury nags at every turn and spin. She adjusts choreography, favors one side, and leans on strong shoes under glamorous dresses. The audience sees grace. They do not see the ice packs and bandages afterward. When bookings dip, there is no safety net. She has a child with significant care needs, unpaid taxes, and bills that stack up faster than offers. Studios like the polished version. Publicity focuses on Carmen Jones, Oscar history, fashion spreads, and romance rumors. Health stories are trimmed down to harmless lines about being tired or needing rest. There is no official campaign showing hospital visits, no honest talk about nerve pain or the pills prescribed to take the edge off. The mix grows heavier over the years. Chronic pain meets slow work and financial pressure. Sedatives appear. So do strong painkillers. Friends notice mood swings and sudden drops in energy. They see her sitting very still between sets, eyes unfocused, trying to pull herself together in time for the next number. The body that once sailed through demanding musical numbers now needs medicine just to get through a simple walk to the microphone. On September 8, 1965, Dandridge is found unresponsive in her Los Angeles apartment. She is 34. The first headlines call it a clot in the lung, a blood vessel problem that stops her heart. Later, reports raised the possibility of an overdose of a prescribed antidepressant. Official paperwork lists an embolism, and the drug question never gets a full public answer. Gail Russell's alcoholic heart damage. A casting director once sold Gail Russell to the public as the girl with the shy eyes. That shyness is not a cute quirk. She feels real terror in front of cameras. The first big roles at Paramount flood her with praise and panic at the same time. Studio doctors hand her a liquid answer, a drink to calm the nerves. Then, one more. Then, a habit. What begins as a small glass before a scene turns into a steady flow offset and on. Alcohol becomes the tool that lets her stand on a mark and say a line without shaking. It also becomes the quiet medical problem nobody in the publicity office wants to discuss. When she stumbles or misses call times, press notes blame traffic or fatigue. The word addiction does not appear in fan magazine copy. By the mid-1950s, the damage is obvious to anyone close. She is arrested more than once for driving after drinking. In one incident, her car plows through the front of a coffee shop. Photographers get the wreck photos. Studios step in to soften the narrative. Articles talk about a sensitive actress who had a bad night, not a woman whose body is starting to come apart from constant use. Inside that body, alcohol is busy on the organs that do not get mentioned in press releases. Her liver swells and weakens. Fat builds where it should not. Her heart strains harder to push blood through a system loaded with toxins. Food intake drops. Sleep is broken. The shy eyes that once sold so many posters now sit in a face that looks older than the calendar. The final scene plays out quietly on August 27, 1961, in a small Los Angeles apartment. Russell is found alone, surrounded by empty bottles and old scripts. The coroner's report lists acute and chronic alcohol effects, fatty degeneration of the liver, advanced damage to the heart. In simple terms, years of heavy drinking changed the structure of both organs until they could not support her anymore. Inger Stevens' shifting story. Morning in Los Angeles, April 30th, 1970. A friend walks into Inger Stevens' small Hollywood home and finds the TV star on the kitchen floor. The stove is off. The lights are on. Emergency services rush her to a hospital. Doctors cannot bring her back. She is 35. Within hours, wire services push a short bulletin. The early line is neat. She was found alone. There was no note. It sounds like a sudden collapse, a private heartbreak that nobody saw coming. That is the version most evening papers run first. The medical work tells a harsher story. Toxicology tests show a high level of barbiturates in her system. The coroner writes, acute barbiturate poisoning on the report and marks the manner as self-inflicted. This is not a random fall or hidden illness. It is an overdose. Here is where the record bends. Police later clarify that she was not, in fact, found alone. A companion was present in the house. That detail was missing from the first official statements. Some outlets correct the error. Others do not bother. Two different versions of the same morning now exist in print. Her private life adds more quiet edits. After her death, it comes out that she had been secretly married to Ike Jones, a black producer. They had kept the marriage out of the press for years. Agents and friends confirm they feared what an interracial marriage would do to her career in the 1960s. That choice kept a major part of her support system invisible on paper. Public comments from the industry stay soft. Co-workers talk about a hard worker who seemed fragile. Studio spokespeople ask for privacy. They mention emotional strain but glide past the fact that this was a planned act using prescription drugs, not a mystery illness. The files line up in a more blunt way. Hospital notes, the coroner's summary, and the final death certificate all point to a deliberate overdose. Bob Crane's private decline. When people talk about Bob Crane, they usually jump straight to the crime scene in Scottsdale in 1978. Before that shocking end, there is a long stretch of health and behavior problems that never make it into studio blurbs. On set, the star of Hogan's Heroes starts to look less like the smooth radio pro he once was. Co-workers from the later years describe a man who forgets conversations and repeats stories. Lines that once came to him with ease now take extra coaching. Jokes fall flat because he loses the thread. Friends say his moods swing fast, calm one moment, sharp and irritable the next. None of this shows up in fan magazines. Away from the studio lot, another pattern builds. Crane spends more time with home video gear and a tight circle of new buddies. He films almost everything. The tapes focus on his private life. People close to him later describe an obsession that pushes aside work and family. That kind of shift, from a steady career to a narrow fixation, is a classic warning sign in medical textbooks. In public, it gets framed as wild behavior, not a possible health issue. By the late 1970s, his career has cooled. Guest roles replace steady leads. He takes stage, work, and small projects to keep money coming in. There are hints that he has seen doctors about headaches and stress. Any real diagnosis, if there was one, stays locked under medical privacy laws. Studios and networks stick to safe language. They call him difficult or unpredictable, terms that shift blame without ever asking why his behavior has changed so much. Then comes June 29, 1978. Crane misses a call. A co-star goes to his rented apartment and finds him in bed with fatal head injuries. Police open a homicide case. Reporters circle. Investigators seize photo slides, tapes, and gear. What they do not seize or share is any full medical history that might explain the years of decline leading up to that morning. The case becomes a true crime favorite. Brandon Tartikoff's hidden crash. Long before people saw Brandon Tartikoff on magazine covers as the young boss of NBC, he lay in a hospital bed wired to monitors. In 1973, while working in advertising in Louisiana, his car was hit in a serious wreck. The crash left him with major head injuries. His skull was fractured. He spent days in a coma. Doctors were not sure he would wake up. When he did, the work was only starting. Speech came back in broken pieces. Short-term memory was unreliable. Simple tasks needed slow, careful practice. Therapists walked him through exercises that most adults never have to think about. His survival was not a quick movie montage. It was months of rehab and constant medical checks. By the time he arrived at NBC years later, that history was almost invisible in public. Press kits called him a boy wonder. They talked about his eye for scripts, his instincts with comedy, his push for shows like The Cosby Show and Miami Vice. They did not talk about the crash that had forced his brain to build new paths just to keep up with the conversation. People who worked closely with him saw traces. He took more notes than most executives. He liked written reminders, clear schedules, and steady routines. None of that is strange in television, but for him it was also a set of tools to manage past damage. The medical file showed a man who had once struggled to speak clearly. The public file showed a slick programmer bantering with hosts. Publicists and network staff cleaned up his backstory. When profiles came in, early drafts that mentioned the accident were sometimes trimmed. Articles kept the focus on ratings, battles, and schedule moves. The near-fatal crash and long rehab stayed a paragraph or two at most, if it was mentioned at all. Later in his life, he spoke more openly about that year. He described the crash, the coma, and the rehab in his memoir. Only then did many readers learn that the man who reshaped American TV had once faced a very real chance of never returning to any workplace. Heather O'Rourke's misread symptoms. On the set of Poltergeist, Heather O'Rourke looked like every casting director's dream child star. Clear voice, direct gaze, no fear in front of a camera. By the mid-1980s, she carried a whole horror franchise on shoulders that still fit kids' clothes. Off-camera, a quieter story was building in clinic rooms. In early 1978, she began to feel sick. There was swelling in her face. She had stomach pain and cramps. Doctors diagnosed Crohn's disease, a chronic bowel condition. She received treatment based on that label. Medicines helped some symptoms, at least for a while. Studio statements during Poltergeist the third filming said she was under care and doing well enough to work. Behind those statements, her health remained uneven. She missed school days. She had bouts of vomiting and severe discomfort. Short breaks on set stretched longer as her body struggled. The diagnosis stayed the same, even when signs did not fully match it. Crohn's became the fixed answer that shaped every plan. On the 1st of February, 1988, things went sharply wrong. That morning, she collapsed at home. Paramedics rushed her to a local hospital, then to a children's hospital in San Diego. Doctors discovered that she did not have Crohn's disease. She had a congenital narrowing in her intestine. A blockage had developed. Infection spread into her bloodstream. Surgeons operated to remove the blockage, but it was too late. Her heart could not handle the shock. She died that same day at the age of 12. The medical examiner later stated that the true cause was intestinal obstruction and the resulting infection, not the chronic disease that had been on her chart for the past year. When news broke, media outlets repeated the Crohn's label at first, then corrected it as the autopsy findings came out. The mismatch between the earlier diagnosis and the final report raised hard questions. How long had the obstruction been building? Could different tests have spotted it sooner? Those questions moved through medical circles and fan communities, while official statements stayed brief. For many viewers, she remained the brave kid from the screen. The public funeral looked perfect. Cameras, flowers, fans crying in the streets. What no one saw was the autopsy report that listed a detail so strange, doctors still talk about it today. This story begins with what the coroner found when the cameras stopped rolling. Judy Garland's final report. London, the 22nd of June, 1969. In a rented house in Belgravia, Judy Garland's new husband wakes up and finds the bathroom door blocked. When he finally gets it open, Garland is on the floor, unresponsive, at just 47 years old. The rush to save her is short. Paramedics confirm what the scene already suggests. She is gone. Only months earlier, she had married again and was singing in small London clubs. trying to rebuild her career. Now the question is brutal and simple. How did one of Hollywood's most famous voices end up dead on a bathroom floor in London? The answer starts at the coroner's inquest. The pathologist finds a high level of barbiturates in her blood from the drug quinalbarbitone, a strong sleeping pill she had used for years. It is more than a normal dose, enough to slow and stop breathing during sleep, but not the huge amount often seen in clear suicide cases. Her stomach is empty. There are no undissolved tablets inside. That detail tells the coroner she did not swallow a handful of pills all at once. The barbiturates built up in her system over time. The official ruling uses a cold phrase, incautious self-overdosage. In simple terms, she took her usual pills, but her body could not handle them anymore. The death is recorded as accidental. There are no notes, no stage scene, no proof that she meant to end her life that night. The coroner finds no signs of violence, no injuries that point to another person in the room. For decades, doctors and producers gave her stimulants to perform and sedatives to sleep. By the time she reached London, those habits were part of her daily life. The report strips all of that drama down to bare facts. A 47-year-old woman with a long history of barbiturate use, a strong sleeping drug taken once too often, a body that stopped breathing in the middle of the night. Bruce Lee's swollen brain. The news hits Hong Kong on the 20th of July, 1973. Bruce Lee, the man selling packed theaters with Enter the Dragon, is reported dead at just 32. The shock spreads fast. Film crews, reporters, and fans all want one thing, an explanation that makes sense. That afternoon, he had spent hours working on script details with producer Raymond Chow. Later, he visited the apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei. While there, the martial arts star complained about a headache. Ting Pei gave him a tablet of Equigesic, a painkiller that combined aspirin and a tranquilizer. He lay down to rest in a bedroom and did not come out. When others tried to wake him, he did not respond. Doctors at the hospital could not bring him back. The focus moved quickly to the autopsy. Pathologists examined his organs and ordered tests. The most important finding sat in the skull. His brain was swollen, a condition called cerebral edema. Reports at the time said it weighed well above the typical range for an adult male brain. That swelling became the official medical key to his death. The coroner ruled that he had died from a sudden reaction that caused the brain to swell. The term used in the inquest was death by misadventure. In plain language, that meant an unexpected, accidental medical reaction, not an attack, not self-harm. The painkiller he took shortly before he lay down was listed as the likely trigger. From that point, the facts stay narrow. There were no signs of major injury on his body, no evidence that he had been assaulted, no clear proof of poison. The report points to the edema and an adverse reaction, then stops. Elvis Presley's strained heart. Graceland, the 16th of August, 1977. In the main house, Elvis Presley's fiancée finds him on the bathroom floor, unresponsive. Paramedics rush him to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. Doctors work on him in the emergency room, but the resuscitation effort fails. He is declared dead that afternoon at 42. Attention switches almost immediately to the autopsy. A team of pathologists examines his organs and orders lab tests. Early statements from officials point to a heart problem. The first public language speaks of a likely cardiac rhythm disturbance, not a single massive heart attack caught in the act. Inside the body, the doctors see clear signs of long-term strain. Later accounts from people involved in the case describe significant coronary artery disease and an enlarged heart. His weight had climbed, and he had a long record of high blood pressure and other risk factors. On paper, he looks far from the energetic young singer fans remember from the 1950s. Toxicology testing shows a long list of prescription drugs. There are sedatives, painkillers, and other medications that he had been taking under medical supervision. The levels raise questions about chronic use and how those substances may have affected his heart, breathing, and digestion. The presence of many drugs in combination becomes one of the most discussed parts of his file. Another detail that emerges in later reports comes from the condition of his intestines. Physicians who reviewed the case described severe, long-term constipation and a large amount of compacted material in the colon. They argue that this problem links to years of medication and poor diet, and that it likely made him uncomfortable and less active for a long time before his death. John Belushi's fatal speedball. Sunset Boulevard, the 5th of March, 1982. At the Chateau Marmont in West Hollywood, hotel staff and friends become alarmed when they cannot rouse John Belushi in his bungalow. He has spent the previous night and early morning with visitors, drinking and using drugs. By the time paramedics arrive, the comedian is already beyond help. He is pronounced dead at 33. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office takes over. During the autopsy, the pathologist notes track marks on his arms and sends blood and tissue samples for toxicology. The lab results show high levels of heroin and cocaine in his system. The combination is known as a speedball, a mix that puts huge stress on the heart and central nervous system. The official cause of death is recorded as acute cocaine and heroin intoxication. That phrase means the drugs did not simply appear as background use. They directly triggered the collapse, most likely through sudden respiratory failure and heart strain. There are no signs of a prolonged illness, no evidence that an underlying natural disease is to blame. At first, the focus is on the tragedy itself. Belushi had gone from Saturday Night Live to movie success with films like Animal House and The Blues Brothers. Now the autopsy shows a very different reality behind the jokes. In the days that follow, witnesses start talking about who supplied the heroin and who was in the room when the injections took place. One key witness is Kathy Evelyn Smith, a friend who had been with him during his final hours. In later interviews and statements, she admits to giving him drug injections. Her admissions, combined with the toxicology findings, move the case from a simple overdose inquiry to a criminal investigation. Prosecutors in Los Angeles build a case that her actions helped cause his death. Years later, Smith is charged and pleads no contest to involuntary manslaughter and drug charges. She serves time in prison. The coroner's report, with its clear ruling on the speedball mixture, plays a central part in that process. Karen Carpenter's collapsing heart. The call to paramedics goes out from Downey, California on the 4th of February 1983. Karen Carpenter has collapsed at her parents' home after returning from a doctor's visit. She is taken to Downey Community Hospital. Doctors work on her in the emergency room, but their efforts fail. She is declared dead at 32. The medical history already on file is serious. For years, her family and doctors have watched drastic changes in her weight. Behind the polished performances of the Carpenters, she has battled anorexia nervosa, a disorder that affects eating habits, hormone levels, muscles, and the heart. By the time she returns to California from treatment efforts in New York, her body is in a fragile state. The Los Angeles County Coroner orders a full autopsy. The exam shows that her heart has failed. Toxicology testing looks for drugs that might explain the collapse. The key term in the final report is emetine cardiotoxicity due to or as a consequence of anorexia nervosa. Emetine is a substance found in certain strong vomiting agents. In plain terms, the coroner links damage to the heart muscle with long-term disordered behavior around food and purging. This ruling is an important detail. It does not point to a sudden party overdose or a random event on a single day. It ties her death to a pattern that stretched across years, including extreme dieting, loss of body mass, and stress on the cardiovascular system. Her body weight had dropped far below a safe range. The weakened heart could not handle the strain any longer. The exam does not show heavy, illegal drug use. There is no evidence of foul play. There is no sign that someone forced a harmful dose into her system at the last moment. Instead, the report describes a young woman whose heart gave out after a long battle with an illness that had gone under-recognized in public conversation. After the autopsy, medical writers and mental health experts start pointing to this case when they explain anorexia nervosa to the public. Her death certificate lists a quiet but deadly chain: an eating disorder, chronic strain on organs, and a final cardiac collapse in a family home, far from the concert halls where audiences once stood and applauded. Tupac Shakur's autopsy record. Las Vegas, the 7th of September, 1996. The city is crowded for a heavyweight boxing match. After the fight, Tupac Shakur rides in the passenger seat of a BMW sedan, part of a small convoy moving through late-night traffic. At a red light near the Strip, a white Cadillac pulls up. Gunfire erupts from the other car. Shakur is hit several times. Emergency crews rush him to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. Surgeons operate to control internal bleeding and repair damage. He is moved to intensive care. Over the next 6 days, he remains in the hospital under heavy care, with family and friends visiting under tight security. Despite the medical team's efforts, his condition worsens. On the 13th of September, at about 4 in the afternoon, he is pronounced dead at 25. The Clark County Coroner's Office conducts the autopsy. The report documents multiple gunshot wounds. 2 bullets struck his chest, damaging a lung and vital blood vessels. Another wound is recorded in the thigh area, with a further graze injury to the hand. Doctors note that he developed respiratory failure and cardiopulmonary arrest as a direct result of those injuries. Toxicology tests check for alcohol and drugs. Public summaries of the report focus on the ballistic injuries rather than any substance findings. The cause of death is listed clearly as multiple gunshot wounds. There is no mention of a major pre-existing disease that might have made the event more likely. The death is classified as a homicide. Very little of the full document is released, but enough detail reaches the public to establish the basic medical facts. A young man in normal health suffers serious chest wounds, massive internal bleeding, and organ damage that even rapid surgery cannot reverse. Those points sit in stark contrast with later conspiracy theories that claim he survived or fled. Over the years, the case remains unsolved. Investigations move through witness interviews, rival gang links, and changes in suspects. None of that alters what the coroner recorded. Anna Nicole's drug cocktail. Security at a Florida hotel calls 911 on the 8th of February 2007. Anna Nicole Smith is unresponsive in her suite at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood, Florida. Her bodyguard and a registered nurse on site perform CPR until paramedics arrive. She is taken to Memorial Regional Hospital. Doctors try to revive her. She is pronounced dead at 39. The Broward County Medical Examiner, Dr. Joshua Perper, leads the investigation. He orders a full autopsy and toxicology panel. Weeks of speculation follow in the press. Some talk about foul play. Others repeat rumors about heavy illegal drug use. The exam and lab work cut through those claims. When Perper announces the findings, the wording is precise. The cause of death is combined drug intoxication. The main drug listed is chloral hydrate, a strong sedative that had once been used as a sleep aid. In her blood and tissues, the lab also finds several benzodiazepines, including medications in the same family as Valium and Ativan. They are all legal prescription drugs, but together they form a dangerous mix. The report notes that the levels of chloral hydrate are high enough to be toxic by themselves. The other sedatives in her system add to the effect. They slow breathing, weaken protective reflexes, and strain the body's ability to clear the drugs. Perper explains that chloral hydrate tipped the balance. In other words, it was the key factor in a stack of sedating medicines. Toxicology identifies methadone only in her bile, not at levels that caused the collapse that day. No illegal drugs show up as contributing agents. The manner of death is ruled accidental. The report also mentions infections and physical stress as secondary factors that made her weaker and more vulnerable to the overdose. Another disturbing detail comes from the prescription patterns. Many of the drugs in her name were actually written under other names linked to people close to her. That raises questions about how easily she could obtain sedatives and how closely her use was monitored. Michael Jackson's propofol file. The 25th of June, 2009, in a rented mansion in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. Michael Jackson is in his bedroom preparing for a long run of This Is It comeback concerts. He has struggled with severe insomnia. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, is in the house to help him sleep. By late morning, Jackson has already received several sedatives, including drugs from the benzodiazepine group, under Murray's care. They do not bring the sleep he wants. According to later testimony, Jackson keeps asking for milk, his word for propofol, a powerful anesthetic normally used in operating rooms. Murray finally gives him a dose of propofol through an intravenous line while monitoring him alone in the bedroom. There is no anesthesiology team, no ventilator, and no standard hospital equipment. At some point after the injection, Murray notices that Jackson is no longer breathing and has a weak or absent pulse. A 911 call goes out from the house at 12:21 p.m. Paramedics arrive to find Jackson unresponsive. They continue CPR and other measures on scene, then transport him to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. After further attempts to restart his heart, doctors pronounce him dead at 2:26 p.m. He is 50 years old. The Los Angeles County coroner performs an autopsy the next day. The toxicology report shows significant levels of propofol in his blood, along with lorazepam and other sedatives. The official cause of death is listed as acute propofol intoxication, with the benzodiazepines noted as contributing factors. The manner of death is classified as homicide. Investigators focus on how and where the drug was used. Propofol bottles and medical supplies are found in the bedroom and nearby areas, not in a clinic setting. Expert witnesses later explain that propofol should only be used by trained teams with full monitoring and airway support. That standard was not met in this case. In 2011, a Los Angeles jury finds Conrad Murray guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The verdict rests on the coroner's findings and on evidence that he gave a surgical anesthetic in a private home without proper safeguards. Brittany Murphy's pneumonia case. On the morning of the 20th of December, 2009, emergency services receive a call from a house in the Hollywood Hills. 32-year-old actor Brittany Murphy has collapsed in the bathroom. Her mother and husband say she had been sick for days with flu-like symptoms. Paramedics rush her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. At the hospital, she goes into cardiac arrest. Doctors cannot reverse it. She is pronounced dead. The Los Angeles County coroner takes over. An autopsy is performed the next day. The exam notes a young woman with recent weight changes and signs of illness in the lungs. Tissue samples and fluids are sent to the lab. Toxicology testing begins to look for alcohol, illegal drugs, and prescription medicine levels. When the final report is released, the main cause of death is listed as untreated community-acquired pneumonia. The document also names iron deficiency, anemia, and multiple drug intoxication from prescription and over-the-counter medications as contributing factors. Those drugs include common pain relievers and cold medicines. The levels are not high enough to kill her by themselves, but they make her weaker while the infection grows. The anemia is another red flag. Her red blood cell count is low. That means her body is carrying less oxygen at a time when her lungs are already under strain. Together, the lung infection, the anemia, and the sedating effect of some medicines form a chain that ends in her collapse at home. The coroner classifies the manner of death as accidental. The report does not show foul play or a deliberate overdose, and investigators find no sign of a violent assault. The findings move the story away from rumors of heavy illegal drug use and toward a quieter but still deadly mix of sickness and self-treatment. Public health experts speak to news outlets after the autopsy. They warn that serious chest infections in young adults need fast medical treatment, not days of home remedies. Later, some family members question the conclusions, suggesting toxins in the house. Federal tests on samples from the home do not support a poisoning theory. Official records stay unchanged. Whitney Houston's bathtub report. Hotel staff at the Beverly Hilton moved quickly on the afternoon of the 11th of February, 2012. In a fourth-floor suite, singer Whitney Houston is found unresponsive in a bathtub. Efforts to revive her begin in the room. Paramedics continue care when they arrive, but she does not respond. She is pronounced dead at 48. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office opens an investigation. An autopsy is carried out the next day. The pathologist examines her heart, lungs, and other organs. Blood and tissue samples are collected for toxicology. In the meantime, media outlets speculate about overdose, relapse, and violent scenarios. When the official report is released, the primary cause of death is listed as drowning. Two major contributing conditions are named. One is atherosclerotic heart disease, meaning a buildup of plaque in the coronary arteries. The other is recent cocaine use. Together, they create a setting in which even a brief loss of consciousness in the bathtub can become fatal. Toxicology results also show the presence of several other substances. These include a sedating anxiety medication, an antihistamine often used for allergies or sleep, and a muscle relaxant. Levels are in a range that can cause drowsiness and impaired judgment, but are not by themselves recorded as lethal. No alcohol is found in the blood sample. Marijuana metabolites are present from earlier use. When the coroner holds a press conference, the findings confirm what independent doctors had suspected. The mix of chronic heart disease, stimulant use, and extra sedating medicines made any time alone in water a serious risk. The manner of death is ruled accidental. The report does not support theories of a staged scene or a direct physical attack by another person. Instead, it outlines a series of risk factors: a heart already under strain, active stimulant use, and additional medicines that reduce alertness. In that context, a hotel bathtub becomes a dangerous place. Investigators review security footage, staff accounts, and timelines. Nothing in that material changes what the autopsy shows. Not every lie in Hollywood was whispered. Some were typed, notarized, and filed. These death certificates don't just record a date, they reveal everything no one dared say out loud. The heart failure wasn't natural. Jean Harlow was one of MGM's biggest stars in the 1930s, but her death certificate left more questions than answers. It said acute nephritis, a vague term for kidney failure. What it didn't say was how fast she declined and how badly things were handled behind the scenes. She collapsed on set in May 1937. At first, doctors blamed it on the flu. Then it was gallbladder trouble. She was swollen, couldn't keep food down, and her breath smelled like ammonia, an obvious sign of kidney issues. Still, no one got her to a specialist. MGM reportedly didn't want bad press. They downplayed her condition. By the time she was finally hospitalized, it was too late. Her kidneys were shutting down and fluid was flooding her lungs. She passed away just days later. The official record listed heart failure and uremia caused by nephritis, but experts later said her symptoms fit a treatable infection. She didn't need to die at 26. Stomach lined with acid burns. Thelma Todd was found slumped in her car, parked inside a garage near Pacific Palisades. The official cause: carbon monoxide poisoning. But the death certificate included something the headlines missed: damage to her stomach lining from acid exposure. Todd had spent the weekend partying. Witnesses said she seemed fine when she left, but hours later, her body was discovered. The garage belonged to her ex's wife, which fueled rumors. Some suspected foul play. Others pointed to accidental death after falling asleep with the engine running. No alcohol was found in her system, no bruises, just the gas and the acid. The certificate listed accidental death, but multiple doctors questioned why a healthy woman would sit in a running car, fully dressed, in freezing weather. And where did the acid come from? Bruising hours before overdose. Carole Landis was found unresponsive in her Brentwood home. The cause on the certificate: overdose. But the full report noted something unusual: faint bruising on both wrists and upper arms. No one could explain it. She had just spent the evening with actor Rex Harrison, who was married at the time. Landis reportedly begged him not to leave her. After he went home, she wrote several notes, only one of which made it to police. The others disappeared. The official story said she took sleeping pills late that night, but her certificate recorded lividity and rigor that didn't match the timeline. Some believe Harrison waited hours before calling for help. The bruises weren't deep, but they were fresh. The coroner couldn't say if they were defensive or accidental. Either way, they weren't consistent with someone just lying down and going to sleep. Liver weighed almost double. Ernie Kovacs died in a car crash. He lost control of his Chevy Corvair in the rain and slammed into a utility pole. The crash was instant, but his death certificate included something unrelated to the accident. His liver was massively enlarged, nearly double the normal size. The report listed cirrhosis suspected, which suggested years of heavy alcohol use. Friends later admitted he drank daily, often on set, but no one had talked about long-term damage until that form came out. His widow, Edie Adams, insisted alcohol played no part in the crash. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of death, but the liver condition revealed a deeper issue. He had been hiding serious health problems, even from those closest to him. There was no foul play, no scandal, just a one-car wreck in the rain. But that one line on the certificate, chronic liver disease, noted, quietly changed how people saw him. 3rd degree, burns after crash. Jane Mansfield died instantly when her car slammed into the rear of a slowed tractor trailer outside New Orleans. The top of the vehicle was sheared off, killing all 3 adults in the front seat. Her children, asleep in the back, survived with minor injuries. Early news reports claimed she'd been decapitated. That wasn't true. The coroner later clarified the cause of death as crushed skull with severe brain trauma. Her head injuries were catastrophic but not surgical separation. A wig was found yards from the crash site, which likely fueled the false rumors. The press ran with it, but the official report stayed clear. She suffered multiple skull fractures, massive facial trauma, and instant loss of life. There were no burns, no fire, and no explosion. Just the full force of a steel truck hitting a low-sitting car at highway speed. The accident also prompted a nationwide push for truck underride guards, the safety bars now common on trailers. Morphine level off the charts? Judy Garland's death certificate listed barbiturate overdose, but the toxicology notes told a deeper story. The morphine level in her blood was higher than the known fatal range. Her body had built such a high tolerance, it blurred the line between survival and collapse. She had a long history of pill use, first given stimulants as a teenager by the studio. Over time, she needed more to sleep, more to wake up, more to get through a day. Her house in London was quiet that morning when her husband found her. Too quiet. The coroner said the overdose wasn't deliberate. Her liver and kidneys were already struggling, and the medication just pushed them over the edge. The certificate noted chronic malnutrition and organ stress, not surprising for someone who had lived on pills and cigarettes for years. There were no signs of trauma or foul play, just a woman whose system couldn't take it anymore. She was 4'11", barely 90 pounds, and her organs were giving out. Overdose from potent heroin batch. Janis Joplin was found face down on the floor of her Los Angeles hotel room, a cigarette still in her hand. The death certificate confirmed the cause, heroin overdose, with alcohol playing a supporting role. She was just 27. Another addition to the now famous 27 Club. There was no note, no staged farewell. Her friends said she seemed upbeat the night before, but they also said the heroin in circulation that week was unusually potent. Several others in her circle overdosed around the same time. Her room showed no signs of struggle. An open pack of cigarettes, change on the nightstand, and a cap from a syringe. That's it. No one heard a thing. By the time she was found, it was too late. Toxicology confirmed the drugs in her system were strong enough to stop her heart in minutes. Her liver and heart showed signs of long-term stress, likely from constant use and alcohol. There were rumors, theories, and fan speculation, but the paperwork was simple and final. Joplin didn't plan it. She didn't see it coming. The dose was just too much, and no one was there to catch it in time. Fatal brain swelling from painkiller. Bruce Lee collapsed suddenly while at a colleague's apartment in Hong Kong. The official cause of death, listed on his certificate, was cerebral edema, severe brain swelling. What triggered it was a common prescription drug, Equagesic, a mix of aspirin and a tranquilizer. Just 2 months earlier, Lee had collapsed in a recording studio. Doctors said it was likely heat stroke or a bad reaction to pain meds. He recovered fast. But on the day he died, he complained of a headache and took a single Equagesic tablet. He never woke up. The coroner found no alcohol or recreational drugs in his system, but the reaction to the medication was so extreme, it caused the brain to swell rapidly. His earlier episode should have been a warning. Instead, it was dismissed. Heart was nearly double-sized. Elvis Presley's death certificate said he died of a heart attack. What the final medical examiner's notes revealed was more severe. His heart weighed over 500 grams. That's nearly twice the normal size. Found face down in the bathroom at Graceland, Elvis had been battling multiple health issues. The certificate pointed to cardiac arrhythmia, but the details added up to something bigger. His body showed signs of chronic constipation, liver damage, and nerve issues. The heart enlargement stood out. It was proof his system had been under pressure for years. Toxicology found 14 different substances in his blood, all prescriptions, some meant for sleep, others for digestion or pain. He wasn't over the limit on any single drug, but together they overwhelmed him. The heart simply couldn't keep up. The report also noted excessive fluid in his lungs and swelling in his colon, symptoms missed during routine checkups. He hadn't looked well in years, but few knew how far gone he was. Brain shrinking from alcohol use. Truman Capote's death certificate listed liver disease as the primary cause, but the final report also noted brain atrophy. His brain had started shrinking. That detail never made the headlines, but it explained everything. Capote had long battled addiction. Alcohol and pills were his daily routine in his final years. His speech had become slurred, his memory unreliable. By the time of his death, friends barely recognized him. He died in a guest bedroom at a friend's house in Los Angeles. The death certificate cited liver failure complicated by phlebitis and multiple drug intoxication. But the coroner included a quiet note, signs of central nervous system decline consistent with long-term substance use. In plain terms, his brain was deteriorating. There was no single overdose, no drama, just a body shutting down piece by piece. The shrinking brain explained his erratic behavior, confusion, and emotional swings. It was the kind of detail most people miss, but it said everything about what those last years were really like. Blunt trauma before drowning. Carole Wayne was best known for her bubbly roles on late-night television. She vanished during a trip to Mexico. Days later, her body was found face down in shallow water. The death certificate said probable drowning, but the autopsy listed something else: blunt trauma to the head and abdomen. She had been vacationing with a man she'd argued with earlier that week. According to him, she went for a walk alone and never came back. But the coroner noted bruises inconsistent with a fall or accidental slip. No alcohol or drugs were found in her system. The Mexican authorities closed the case quickly. No foul play was listed, no follow-up was done. The report left open the possibility of an accident, but the injuries raised doubts. Her passport, jewelry, and luggage were all still in the hotel. The certificate didn't tell the full story, but it showed more than what the press reported at the time. Survived, but not really. Dominique Dunn was in a coma for 5 days. That part's rarely mentioned. The coroner's report confirmed she had brain activity at first. Machines kept her breathing while her family waited. Her certificate lists the final cause, traumatic asphyxia, but the timeline made it more tragic. She had been attacked in her driveway by her ex-boyfriend. Neighbors heard her scream. By the time paramedics arrived, she had lost consciousness. But she didn't die on the spot. She lingered, and the hospital documented it: all seizures, swelling, brain hemorrhage. Her injuries were brutal. The autopsy noted fractures around the neck and deep bruising, but the certificate emphasized something else: respiratory arrest due to external pressure. Clinical, but clear. Her family eventually removed life support. That's when the certificate was finalized. The delay made headlines, but the official record captured the quiet suffering in between. Unusual toxicology. No clear answers. David Carradine was found in a Bangkok hotel closet, partially suspended by cords. The death certificate listed asphyxiation. The circumstances were unusual, and the official investigation left more questions than clarity. There were no signs of forced entry, no alcohol or illegal drugs in his system. Thai authorities ruled it an accident. The exact mechanism wasn't publicly detailed, and no charges were filed. Some reports suggested the manner of death was self-inflicted, but the family disputed those claims. The LAPD opened a review at the family's request, though they had no authority abroad. Carradine's family ordered a private autopsy in the U.S., but the results were never released in full. There were rumors about chemical traces and missed forensic details, but no confirmed evidence was made public. Carradine had a long acting career and was in Bangkok filming a new movie. He'd last been seen the night before at dinner with producers. Lethal mix of prescribed sedatives. Heath Ledger was found face down in bed at his New York apartment. The death certificate listed acute intoxication from a mix of prescription medications. None were illegal, but together, they slowed his body down until it couldn't recover. Toxicology showed 6 medications in his system: 2 painkillers, 2 anti-anxiety drugs, a sleeping aid, and an antihistamine. Each drug was within legal limits, but the combination was lethal. The sedatives depressed his breathing, leading to oxygen loss and eventual heart failure. There were no signs of trauma, and no note was left behind. His house was quiet, his bed undisturbed. He had been battling insomnia and anxiety for months. Doctors had prescribed the drugs separately, but no one tracked how they would interact in his body. The coroner ruled the death accidental. He didn't take too much of one thing, he took just enough of everything to make recovery impossible. His breathing slowed while he slept, and no one noticed until it was too late. Organs too decayed to test. Brittany Murphy's death was ruled as pneumonia with secondary anemia and multiple drug intoxication, but the report included a line that raised eyebrows. Several of her organs were too decayed to test properly. That wasn't due to delay. It happened fast. Within hours of death, she collapsed in her bathroom and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Her husband claimed she had flu-like symptoms for days. The coroner found dozens of medications in her system, mostly over-the-counter drugs. No illegal substances, no high-dose narcotics. What shocked investigators wasn't the toxicology, it was the rapid breakdown of tissue. Her organs had started to rot unusually fast. That led to speculation about mold in her home or environmental toxins. Nothing conclusive was ever found. Her father later called for further testing. The LA County coroner said no foul play was involved. Still, the organ decay made it difficult to get a clear answer. When her husband died just 5 months later under similar conditions, the questions grew. The report stayed the same, natural causes, but the body had deteriorated so quickly that some answers died with her. Severe nasal collapse noted. Michael Jackson's death certificate cited acute propofol intoxication, but deeper in the autopsy were findings related to years of surgeries, most notably severe nasal collapse. The structure of his nose had weakened to the point that breathing through it was limited. One nostril was nearly closed off. His personal doctor had administered the surgical anesthetic to help him sleep. Combined with other sedatives, it stopped his breathing. But the report also included physical signs of long-term strain, scarring from multiple operations, adhesive residue from prosthetic support, and thinning cartilage. These weren't the cause of death, but they helped explain his overall condition. His lungs were inflamed, his skin showed signs of vitiligo, and his weight had dropped below 140 pounds. The nasal collapse was one of many stress points his body had endured quietly for years. Jackson's team tried to control the narrative, but the certificate listed not only the overdose, but also contributing conditions, chronic insomnia, multiple medical dependencies, and respiratory restriction from past surgeries. Prescription bottles with labels removed. Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a Beverly Hilton bathtub. Her death certificate listed drowning, with heart disease and drug use as contributing factors. But the investigators' notes included a strange detail. Several pill bottles in her room had missing or scratched off labels. The coroner found a mix of prescription medications, anxiety pills, muscle relaxers, and antihistamines. None were in illegal quantities. But the altered bottle suggested someone didn't want the exact sources identified. That part was never explained. Toxicology showed she had used cocaine recently, but the levels weren't considered fatal. What likely happened was a sudden cardiac event, followed by unconsciousness and slipping beneath the water. The bathwater was shallow, but she never came up. Her body also had minor abrasions on her forehead, nose, and upper lip. The report said they may have come from contact with the tub during the fall. The combination of prescription drugs and a weakened heart proved too much, but the missing labels added a layer of mystery. Advanced decay hours after death. Philip Seymour Hoffman was found in his New York apartment with a syringe still in his arm. The death certificate cited acute mixed drug intoxication. But the medical notes described something surprising. His body showed signs of advanced decomposition far earlier than expected. The coroner noted full postmortem lividity, body stiffness, and skin changes that usually take longer to appear. It suggested he had been gone for many hours before discovery, maybe even the entire night. Inside his apartment, police found nearly 70 bags of heroin, many unopened. Several prescription drugs were also on the scene. The combination had overwhelmed his nervous system quickly, but the state of his body hinted that no one had checked on him for some time. Friends thought he'd been clean. He had just finished rehab. The advanced decay made the timeline difficult to piece together. No one heard anything. No neighbors reported noise. The scene was silent and stayed that way for hours. Chest burns from emergency shocks. Carrie Fisher's death certificate listed sleep apnea and other undetermined factors. But the full report revealed burn marks across her chest, residue from emergency defibrillator paddles used mid-flight. Fisher had gone into cardiac arrest on a plane from London to Los Angeles. Passengers reported she stopped breathing just before landing. Paramedics rushed on board and began CPR immediately. The burns came from repeated shocks to restart her heart. They didn't work. Toxicology later found multiple substances in her system. The mix wasn't high enough to name a single cause. The coroner wrote that while drug use likely contributed, the exact trigger couldn't be confirmed. What stood out were the efforts to save her. The burns were deep enough to be noted in the report, showing how hard responders tried. She was on a ventilator for days before she passed. The official file didn't blame the substances alone. It pointed to long-standing health problems, sleep apnea, and a weakened heart. Stroke struck hours after collapse. Debbie Reynolds passed away just one day after her daughter, Carrie Fisher. Her death certificate listed intracerebral hemorrhage, a massive stroke caused by bleeding in the brain. It was sudden, and it hit hard. She collapsed at her son Todd's home while discussing funeral arrangements for Carrie. Paramedics arrived quickly, but her condition was already deteriorating. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors couldn't reverse the damage. Though no autopsy was publicly released, it was confirmed that she had a history of high blood pressure, a major risk factor for strokes in older adults. She had no recent major illnesses, and her death caught many by surprise. Some sources mention possible complications during the collapse, including breathing difficulties. But the cause was clear: a catastrophic brain event brought on by long-term vascular strain and possibly worsened by the emotional stress of losing her daughter. The timing was heartbreaking. Two icons, gone within 36 hours. Her death certificate made no mention of grief, but everyone close to her believed it played a role.
Born in Montana, cast as an Egyptian, fired for being too independent, praised by presidents, banned by fascists, and still she never played the Hollywood game. This isn't the Myrna Loy your grandma told you about. Born into scandal and strangeness. She was born Myrna Adele Williams on the 2nd of August, 1905, in Helena, Montana. Her father, a successful real estate man and state legislator, was respected in town. Her mother, a trained pianist, had other plans. She wanted out. She didn't care much for Helena's social rules or dusty frontier politics. When Myrna was 13, her father died of the flu while traveling. It crushed the family. Her mother packed up Myrna and her younger brother and moved them to Los Angeles. Not for better schools or family. She moved for opportunity and freedom. They landed in the Baldwin Hills area. Money was tight. Myrna was quiet but observant. She liked reading, sketching, and dancing. She joined local theater groups and took ballet. While still in school, she began working at Grauman's Egyptian Theater, not as an actress, but as a silent, still dancer in elaborate Egyptian costume. She stood on pedestals before movies played, arms out, motionless, like a living statue. She was 18 when a photographer snapped her picture and passed it to a silent film casting director. The look got her in. She lied about her experience and said she could act. Her first few roles were background, maids, servants, and unnamed extras. She didn't speak a word on camera for years. Studios didn't see a leading lady. They saw something else. Her sharp cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes got her labeled as exotic. That word would follow her through more than a dozen films. She was cast as a gypsy, a Chinese mistress, a native princess, an Egyptian dancer, even a villainous seductress in fake brownface. It didn't matter that she was of Welsh and Scottish descent. The roles were all stereotypes, and she took what she was offered. By 1927, she had appeared in almost 30 films. No fanfare, no fame yet. Just a long list of names she didn't choose and roles she couldn't shape. But she was watching, learning. She didn't talk back yet, but she didn't forget. Myrna Loy was in Hollywood, and she was paying attention. From background to breakout. By the late 1920s, Myrna Loy was showing up in everything. She didn't turn roles down, she couldn't afford to. She had no agent, no protection, and no real power. In 1 year alone, she appeared in 13 films. Most were silent, most were bad, but she was getting screen time, and that counted. In 1927, she was cast in Across the Pacific, playing a seductive spy. It wasn't a good role, but her screen presence stood out. That same year, she played a vamp in The Heart of Maryland and a native girl in The Jazz Singer, though the film is mostly remembered now for Al Jolson's blackface performance. Myrna had one line, barely lit. Still, she was there. She finally got a credit line in 1929, but that year also came with a challenge. Sound. Hollywood was panicking over the transition to talkies. Some stars couldn't handle the mic. Myrna wasn't one of them. Her voice, calm and low, translated well. She had a smooth rhythm, a clean delivery, nothing shrill or affected. Even with that advantage, the roles stayed the same. In the 1930s The Desert Song, she played yet another veiled beauty. That same year, she appeared in The Black Watch, Cock of the Walk, and Bride of the Regiment, still boxed in by typecasting. One critic called her a reliable foreigner. But behind the scenes, Myrna was shifting. She started making friends with script supervisors, editors, makeup artists, and anyone who could help her understand how the business worked. She learned how lighting worked, how framing changed a performance. She studied everything. Then came The Animal Kingdom in 1932. It wasn't a big hit, but she played a modern woman, sharp, stylish, and grounded. No accent, no wig, no made-up nationality. And suddenly, producers noticed. That same year, she was cast in Love Me Tonight, opposite Maurice Chevalier. She played a proper French aristocrat, not a seductress, not a threat. For once, she got to be funny, confident, and in control. The Thin Man changed everything. In 1934, everything flipped. Myrna Loy was cast as Nora Charles in The Thin Man. It wasn't a leading role at first. MGM expected the movie to center on the detective, Nick Charles. But from the first scene, Loy stole it. She played Nora with wit, timing, and absolute control. She wasn't just the detective's wife, she was his equal. She drank martinis, cracked jokes, challenged suspects, and lit up the screen without even raising her voice. She made banter look easy. She'd never done comedy like this before. Director W.S. Van Dyke took a chance on her. He was known for shooting fast and loose, sometimes wrapping scenes in one take. Loy thrived in that energy. She didn't rehearse her chemistry with co-star William Powell, it just showed up. They were instantly electric. MGM didn't expect much from The Thin Man. It was a B picture with a modest budget, but it exploded. Audiences fell hard for the married couple who flirted like teenagers and solved murders between cocktails. Critics raved. Loy became an icon overnight. By the end of 1934, she was no longer the girl who played foreigners. She was Nora Charles, and she'd finally become something rare. A woman in film who was smart, funny, and still desirable. No costumes, no seduction plots, but just sharp writing and a sharp performance. MGM rushed to lock her into more films with Powell. They made 5 Thin Man sequels over the next 13 years. Off-screen, they weren't a couple, but their on-screen dynamic was so strong that fans constantly asked if they were married in real life. Quiet battles with the studio. Success didn't make her docile. If anything, it sharpened her resolve. After The Thin Man, MGM wanted to cash in fast. But Myrna Loy wasn't going to say yes to every script they threw at her. She read them carefully. If a character lacked depth or dignity, she passed. That didn't go over well. In 1937, she turned down several roles she found offensive or boring. MGM executives, furious, suspended her without pay. Loy didn't panic. She walked out. Quietly, without a press meltdown. She left Hollywood and, years later, started volunteering with the Red Cross instead. Fans were shocked. So were reporters. Loy didn't give statements. She let the studio sweat. It worked. Within months, MGM came back with a better deal. More control, more say in scripts, and the promise of better roles. She returned on her own terms and made Parnell with Clark Gable and Double Wedding with Powell. The message was clear. She wasn't disposable. Even while under contract, she refused to be treated like property. Studios at the time practically owned their actors, controlling public appearances, interviews, even romantic relationships. Loy said no to arranged dates, photo ops, and fake scandals. She didn't pose for pinups or leak stories to gossip columns. She never played the game. She also kept her political opinions quiet but firm. She was a Roosevelt Democrat in a very Republican town. She donated quietly, spoke cautiously, and never used her career to chase headlines. She played it smart, but she never played it safe. Other actresses noticed. Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, and Barbara Stanwyck all praised Loy's professionalism. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't scandalous, but she got what she wanted without burning bridges. Banned by Hitler himself. In the late 1930s, Myrna Loy wasn't just a movie star, she was a problem. For dictators, at least. While most Hollywood actors stayed quiet on global politics, Loy spoke out, loudly. In interviews and fundraisers, she criticized Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. She called fascism a threat to civilization and warned that Hollywood had a responsibility to say something. That didn't go unnoticed. In 1938, the Nazi government officially banned all of Myrna Loy's films in Germany. No Thin Man, no Test Pilot, no Libeled Lady. Her face was pulled from posters. Her name blacklisted. The reasoning? Too outspoken. The German press called her a bad influence. Loy didn't care. She took it as a compliment. She doubled down. During World War II, Loy turned down roles she felt undermined the war effort or American morale. Instead of playing on-screen heroes, she focused on real-world service. She refused to make movies while troops were dying overseas. From 1942 to 1945, she didn't appear in a single film. While other stars were on soundstages, Loy was visiting hospitals, writing letters to soldiers, and appearing at military bases, not as a character, but as herself. She used her fame as a tool, not for press, not for career gain, just to help. Hollywood quietly respected it, even if it didn't boost box office. MGM tried to lure her back during the war years with soft comedies and romance scripts. She said no, the work could wait. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She just didn't believe in playing pretend while real people were dying. That's how she saw it. Years later, she said, "You couldn't be neutral. You were either against Hitler or you were for him." She stormed Washington, too. After the war, most stars returned to Hollywood. Myrna Loy didn't rush. She had other business in Washington. In 1946, President Truman appointed her to the U.S. National Commission for UNESCO, a post usually held by scholars or diplomats, not actors. But Loy wasn't just a face. She had spent years involved in global aid and education efforts during the war. Now she had a seat at the table. She wasn't there for photo ops. She attended real meetings, gave speeches, and wrote memos. In one memo to the White House, she warned that cultural recovery is as essential as economic aid. Her focus? Global literacy, women's education, and post-war rebuilding. This was uncharted territory for a Hollywood actress. Reporters didn't know what to make of it. She wore tailored suits, not gowns. She skipped red carpets and worked long hours without press coverage. One newspaper wrote, "Myrna Loy is acting like a real public servant." She was. In 1948, she joined the National Committee Against Discrimination in Housing. It was one of the first national civil rights groups to target housing segregation. At the time, that wasn't just unpopular, it was dangerous. But Loy didn't flinch. She gave speeches across the country calling redlining a moral failure and urging Congress to take action. She also met with civil rights leaders behind closed doors, offering her name, funding, and platform, but never making it about herself. Back in Hollywood, people asked if she was done with acting. She wasn't. She just wasn't done helping either. She balanced both worlds quietly, never using her activism to market her films. She refused the spotlight. While other stars chased magazine covers and gossip columns, she stayed quiet and in control. She didn't pose for pin-up spreads. She didn't do interviews unless she had something worth saying. And she didn't fake relationships to sell tickets. Studios hated it. In the 1930s and 40s, studio PR teams built entire careers on public image. They paired stars for publicity, leaked dating rumors, and staged photo shoots to make actors look more all-American or glamorous. Loy refused all of it. She never appeared in a scandal. Not once. There were no leaked affairs, no drunken brawls, no feuds with co-stars. But that didn't mean she was boring. It just meant she didn't let the public in. And people wanted in. She was known for being polite but direct. She answered questions with short, sharp replies. When asked how she avoided scandal, she said, "I mind my own business and other people's when it matters." She kept her personal life almost entirely off the record. No tours of her home. No stories about her childhood pets. Her image stayed clean because she guarded it fiercely. Even when she married 4 times, she didn't let the studios use it. Each marriage ended quietly, without headlines or drama. If reporters asked, she shut it down. This only made her more intriguing. Fans projected their own fantasies onto her. They imagined her as Nora Charles, witty, playful, madly in love. But Loy never confirmed or denied anything. She let them wonder. 4 marriages, no regrets. She got married 4 times. None of them lasted. She didn't hide it. She also didn't dwell on it. Her first marriage was in 1936 to producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. On paper, they looked like a power couple. In private, it was cold. They clashed over money, Loy's career, and how much space they needed. She left after 7 years, quietly. Her second husband was John Hertz Jr., heir to the Yellow Cab fortune. They married in 1942. It lasted less than 2 years. He wanted a wife who stayed home. She wasn't that woman. Her third husband, screenwriter Gene Tierney, came next. That one barely made it a year. She later said, "I got married too often because I liked being in love. I got divorced because I also liked being alone." Her final marriage was to a UN diplomat, Howland Sargent. It seemed more stable until it wasn't. They split after 4 years. Loy never remarried. In interviews, she didn't pretend to be heartbroken or bitter. She just didn't want to settle. She often said that men wanted Nora Charles, not her. They loved the version of her from the screen. The clever, loyal, flirtatious wife who never raised her voice and always had a comeback. But that was a character. Loy was sharper, more private, and not willing to play a role off-screen. She never had children. People asked her why. She said she didn't feel the need to explain. By the 1950s, she had made peace with her choices. She wasn't trying to be an ideal woman. She was just trying to be honest. And sometimes, honesty meant walking away. While the press tried to turn her love life into gossip, she stayed ahead of it. No crying interviews, no public fights, just quiet exits and clean breaks. Hollywood tried to replace her. By the mid-1950s, Hollywood had changed, and not in her favor. Younger actresses were being groomed to replace the stars of the 1930s. Studios wanted fresh faces and bigger headlines. Myrna Loy didn't fit the new formula. She wasn't scandalous, she wasn't desperate, and she wasn't willing to beg for parts. After The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer and Mr. Blandings builds his dream house, offers slowed down, not because she lost her talent, because she aged. She was still in her 40s, Still sharp, still bankable, but women in Hollywood had an expiration date, and hers had apparently passed. She refused to play mothers of grown men. She turned down scripts that treated her like background noise. She knew exactly what she brought to the screen, and she wasn't going to fake her way through a role just to stay visible. So she shifted. She started doing stage work in New York, live theater where talent, not youth, was the currency. She performed in Middle of the Night and The Country Girl. Critics praised her timing, her control, her presence. She didn't need a close-up to command a room. She also started speaking publicly about ageism. In 1955, she told a reporter, "Hollywood knows how to build a star. It still hasn't figured out how to keep one." She wasn't bitter. She just wasn't blind. Still, she made a few more films. In Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes, she played matriarchs, but not passive ones. Her characters had edge, opinion, and agency. If she had to age on screen, she'd do it with dignity. Even as her screen time faded, her influence didn't. Directors still called her the most professional woman in the business. Actresses still named her as a blueprint for how to survive Hollywood without losing yourself. She didn't chase relevance. She didn't panic. She just adjusted. Quietly, as always. She walked away without apology. By the 1960s, Myrna Loy had done what few actresses from her era could say. They retired without becoming a tabloid headline. She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't go on talk shows to explain herself. She just stopped showing up for casting calls. She didn't need to. She had made over 120 films. She had starred alongside William Powell, Clark Gable, Cary Grant, and Spencer Tracy. She had survived the silent era, conquered the studio system, and outlived the contracts meant to control her. She moved to New York and focused on activism, public service, and writing. She published her memoir, Being and Becoming, in 1987. It wasn't filled with Hollywood gossip. It was about identity, about what it meant to be watched, desired, ignored, and misunderstood all at once. In that book, she wrote, "I never had to play dumb. I just had to play it cool." That line summed her up better than any headline ever could. She still attended events when it mattered. She appeared at tributes, film preservation panels, and women's rights fundraisers. But she never tried to reclaim the spotlight. She didn't need to be remembered. She already was. In 1991, she received an honorary Academy Award for her lifetime of work. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. She didn't cry. She made a dry joke, thanked a few names, and walked off stage. Classic Loy. She passed away in 1993, quietly, at age 88. No scandal. No big final act. Just the end of a very long, very rare kind of career. Myrna Loy never gave Hollywood the version of her it wanted. She gave them the version she chose. She never posed half-naked, never leaked a romance, never faked a feud. She didn't have to. She built a legacy without chasing fame. She told off fascists, walked away from bad roles, outsmarted studio heads, and kept her private life exactly that, private. They called her the Queen of Hollywood. She never called herself anything. Because when you do things right, you don't have to explain.
The year was 1943. A film sat locked in vaults too scandalous for theaters. At the center, a woman lying in hay rewriting what was allowed on screen. This wasn't Monroe or Gardner. It was Jane Russell, and her story only gets wilder from here. The bra that launched a legend. The Outlaw wasn't supposed to be a scandal. It was a low-budget Western by Howard Hughes, starring a newcomer named Jane Russell. But Hughes had something bigger in mind. He didn't just want a movie, he wanted shock value. Russell was only 21, with no major roles behind her. Hughes cast her as Rhea McDonald, a sultry saloon girl. During filming, he became obsessed with how her figure appeared on screen. Costumes didn't give him the look he wanted, So he built his own solution, a new kind of bra. Metal rods, wiring, and padding were sewn into a custom design meant to lift her bust unnaturally high. Hughes even filed a patent for it. Jane hated it. "That thing hurt like hell," she said years later. "I threw it in the trash and wore my own." Despite that, Hughes told the press she wore his invention. He wanted the story to spread, and it did. Then came the haystack photo. A publicity still showed Russell reclining in hay, blouse barely holding on. No moviegoers cared about the plot. They wanted to see that image. Theaters received angry letters. Religious groups protested. One censorship board called the photo morally dangerous. The production code refused to approve the movie. Hughes had a plan. He sent fake protest letters to theaters claiming outrage from concerned citizens. It worked. Curious crowds showed up in droves. The limited release in 1943 was chaos. In New York and Los Angeles, people lined up for blocks. In some cities, police were called to manage traffic. Chicago shut the film down mid-run. Jane Russell had barely opened her mouth on screen, but her image was already burned into American culture. The Outlaw didn't make her a star because of her acting. It made her a symbol of everything Hollywood was afraid to show. The full nationwide release didn't happen until 1946. By then, she didn't need it. She was already the most talked about woman in Hollywood. And she had done it without saying a word. Headlines, contracts, and control. After The Outlaw stirred controversy in 1943, Jane Russell's name never left the papers, but behind the headlines, she was caught in a mess of studio politics, lawsuits, and image control. She hadn't asked for any of it. Howard Hughes had her locked under an exclusive contract. That meant no other studio could touch her, and she couldn't choose her roles. She later said, "I was stuck doing whatever he wanted. I couldn't even accept better parts." For years, Hughes refused to loan her out, even when major studios begged. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount all showed interest. Hughes said no. During that time, Jane wasn't making movies. Instead, she was doing press, magazine covers, pin-up shoots, public appearances. It was all meant to keep her famous without ever stepping on set. She became one of the most photographed women in America without releasing a single new film. Then came the court battles. Film censors still tried to block The Outlaw from playing nationwide. Hughes fought back with everything he had, lawyers, appeals, even threats to pull his other films from theaters. Jane stayed quiet in public but admitted later she hated the circus. "I wanted to act, not pose for ads." In 1946, the film finally got wide release. It made millions. Critics weren't kind. Most called the acting wooden and the story dull. But it didn't matter. People came to see her. Hughes had turned Jane into a brand, not an actress. Finally, in 1947, Jane got a new project, Young Widow. It was her first non-Hughes production. The script had depth, and she was eager to prove she could act. But the damage had been done. Audiences still saw her as the Hey Girl. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her presence. Others said she was stiff. She later admitted she was still learning. Still, she wasn't going away. The public had decided Jane Russell was worth watching, even if no one could agree on why. For better or worse, her image had already outgrown the screen. And Hughes? He still wasn't done pulling the strings. Jane versus Hollywood. By 1948, Jane Russell was trapped between fame and frustration. She was known everywhere, but barely working. Hughes continued to control her roles and turn down outside offers. She started to push back. Hughes offered her a part in The Paleface, a comedy western with Bob Hope. Jane didn't think she could do comedy, but she said yes just to get back in front of a camera. It turned out to be a smart move. The film was a hit. Audiences loved her timing, and critics admitted she held her own next to Hope. It was the first time she got to show range. But things weren't smooth behind the scenes. Jane had no power over her career choices. Hughes micromanaged every decision. He approved costumes, scripts, even haircuts. Jane called him obsessed with control. She began quietly asking her lawyers for a way out of the contract. Meanwhile, gossip columns tracked her every move. She was photographed constantly but rarely quoted. Journalists described her as cool, hard to read, and aloof. In truth, she was tired of being treated like a mannequin. Her public image was sex symbol. In private, she was religious, blunt, and preferred quiet. In 1949, she shot The Big Steal with Robert Mitchum. The production was rushed because Mitchum had just been arrested for marijuana possession. The studio needed good press fast. Jane agreed to the project on short notice. It was a basic crime story, but again, she handled it well. Mitchum later said, "Jane was tougher than anyone gave her credit for." She wanted more like that, less glamour, more grit. But Hughes still had her locked down. In 1950, she publicly clashed with studio heads over the roles she was being offered. She turned down several scripts and refused to pose for certain publicity shots. That made her difficult in Hollywood terms. Jane wasn't playing along anymore. She wanted to act, not sell, and slowly people were starting to listen. The pinup girl had found her voice, and she was just getting warmed up. Diamonds, Blondes, and a Stolen Show. In 1953, Jane Russell landed what should have been a supporting role. Instead, she nearly stole the film. The movie? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Her co-star? Marilyn Monroe. Monroe played the sweet, flirty Lorelei. Jane played Dorothy, the sharp brunette who called the shots. On paper, Marilyn was the lead, but on screen, Jane dominated scene after scene. Her timing was cleaner. Her delivery was drier. Her attitude? Unshakable. Most people don't know this. Jane didn't want to do it at first. She thought the musical numbers were silly, but the studio pushed her in, and once filming started, she didn't hold back. She handled her own vocals, danced in heels, and rewrote parts of her dialogue. Monroe had more screen time, but Jane had more control. Crew members said Russell often calmed Marilyn down between takes. She reportedly helped block scenes and guided Monroe through complex shots. Then came the premiere drama. Here's the rumor. Monroe refused to attend the Blondes premiere in Hollywood, so Jane showed up alone and played both roles on the red carpet. She even signed Monroe's name for fans. Reporters called her a total pro and said she carried the night without breaking a sweat. The movie became a global hit. Jane's performance was praised for being grounded and funny, while Marilyn got the attention for her beauty. But behind the scenes, even executives said Jane held the film together. She never bragged about it. In interviews, she gave Monroe credit and avoided drama. But those who worked on the film knew the truth. Jane was the adult in the room. She showed up on time, knew her lines, and never cracked under pressure. That role cemented her as more than a body or a photo. She could act, she could command, and she could outshine a legend without even trying. Hollywood had underestimated her again, but this time everyone saw what she could really do, and Jane didn't need hay or headlines to prove it. The Hollywood Bowl baptism. In 1954, Jane Russell shocked fans again, but this time it had nothing to do with movies or costumes. She stepped into the waters of the Hollywood Bowl in front of thousands and got baptized. It wasn't a publicity stunt. Jane had always kept her faith private. She was raised in a deeply religious home and read the Bible daily. But the tension between her image and her values was growing. After years of posing in tight gowns and playing bombshell roles, she wanted to make a statement. That statement came during a Billy Graham revival event. The massive crowd watched as Jane walked into the water and was fully submerged. It made headlines the next morning. "Movie siren gets saved," one paper wrote. Others called it a mid-career pivot, but Jane didn't care. After that, she became more vocal about her beliefs. She gave interviews criticizing the moral direction of Hollywood. She said too many films celebrated sin and called some of her past work foolish. She even started a group called WAIF, World Adoption International Fund, combining her faith and advocacy. This turn confused people. She was still doing movies and still dressing glamorously, but now she was talking about Jesus on talk shows. Some fans loved it, others tuned out. The industry didn't know how to handle her shift. She didn't back down. In public speeches, she warned young actors to stay grounded and avoid the fast track to ruin. In private, she mentored struggling performers behind the scenes. But not everyone supported her. Some Hollywood insiders mocked her open faith. She was accused of being judgmental and old-fashioned. Producers called her unpredictable. Studios didn't know if she'd promote a film or preach at the premiere. Jane didn't care. She wasn't asking for approval anymore. The woman once labeled too hot for theaters was now talking about redemption and doing it on her own terms. And while the cameras rolled on others, Jane rewrote her own script in real life. Fight with the church. After several miscarriages, she decided to adopt, but adoption in the 1950s wasn't simple, especially across borders. Her first adopted son, Tommy, came from Ireland. The process took over a year. Jane grew frustrated with red tape and church politics. She believed too many kids were stuck in orphanages while paperwork dragged on. In interviews, she called the system heartless and said it cared more about rules than children. So she took matters into her own hands. In one case, she flew overseas, met with the child's caretakers, and returned with the baby before full approval. She claimed it was legal under emergency conditions. Authorities disagreed. The press labeled it baby smuggling. Jane called it saving a life. That incident pushed her to create WAIF, the World Adoption International Fund. It helped connect orphans with families worldwide. Jane used her fame to pressure lawmakers and raise money. She testified in front of Congress and worked with embassies to change regulations. But the backlash was real. Catholic leaders in Ireland accused her of undermining church-run orphanages. One priest called her reckless and self-righteous. Jane fired back, saying the church cared more about control than compassion. Despite the criticism, she expanded her work. WAIF helped place hundreds of children in homes during its peak. Jane personally reviewed applications and even helped pay travel costs for some families. She wasn't just a spokesperson, she was hands-on. This wasn't the Hollywood work people expected from a screen siren, but Jane didn't care about expectations. She said, "If I'd waited for the world's approval, I'd still be posing in hay." Her house in California became a hub for her causes. Her kids lived outside the spotlight, and she rarely talked about them publicly. But in her later interviews, she called them her greatest work. The roles in film paid the bills. The work in adoption, she said, saved her soul. Russell versus feminism. In an era when women's liberation was gaining momentum, Jane took the opposite path, and she made sure everyone knew it. She called second-wave feminism a mess of angry women yelling about problems they created. In one 1,973 interview, she said, "I don't know what they're fighting for. I never had to fight for anything." That quote alone set off a storm. Talk show hosts loved booking her. She clashed with feminist guests and stood her ground, even when audiences booed. She argued that women already had power but were wasting it on resentment. "I've worked with men my whole life," she said. "I never needed to burn my bra to get respect." Her words drew backlash. Gloria Steinem's supporters called her outdated. Some women's groups urged sponsors to drop her from endorsements. But Russell didn't flinch. She said modern feminists misunderstood strength. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing who you are. She also attacked Hollywood for portraying women as helpless victims or hypersexualized cliches. Ironically, critics pointed out that her early roles did exactly that. Jane didn't deny it, but said the problem wasn't the image. It was the intention behind it. By this time, she was focused on her religious activism and charity work. But her conservative takes made headlines more than her advocacy. She called Roe v. Wade a mistake and said America needed less therapy and more churches. She wasn't trying to please anyone. The feminist movement saw her as a relic. Her fans saw her as fearless. Either way, she stayed visible. While other actresses her age faded quietly, Jane Russell kept showing up, louder, bolder, and completely unwilling to change. Love her or hate her, she refused to play the part anyone handed her. At 60 and still breaking rules. In the 1980s, most actresses from Jane Russell's era were long retired, not Jane. At 60, she signed a national ad deal to model Playtex bras. The ads ran on television, in magazines, and in stores across America. Most women her age were expected to disappear from the spotlight, but Jane showed up in full glam, pitching support bras to real women. The tagline, "Does your bra have to show your age?" Jane didn't think so. Critics rolled their eyes. She didn't care. "I wore bras before most of these ad execs were born," she joked in an interview. "I know what works." And she meant it. The campaign was a hit. Sales spiked, especially among older women who saw her as relatable, not ridiculous. But this comeback wasn't just about ads. She started making more public appearances again. Church groups, charity galas, even morning talk shows. She wasn't doing movies, but she wasn't fading away either. She found a way to stay in front of the public without pretending to be younger than she was. And she wasn't afraid to call out ageism. When a reporter asked if she'd consider a comeback film, she replied, "Sure, if they let me play a 60-year-old woman who acts like one." She also joked that it was the first time in her life people cared about her comfort more than her figure. Back then, it was all underwire and pain. Now it's all soft cups and scents. Took long enough. The lingerie campaign made headlines, not for shock, but for surprise. No one expected Jane Russell, the once silent symbol of scandal, to become the face of grown-up confidence. She wasn't trying to seduce anymore. She was trying to relate. And that hit harder than any bombshell act ever could. In a business that tossed women aside after 40, Jane Russell didn't just refuse to disappear. She came back in a bra and reminded the world who she was. And she did it with a wink, not an apology. Outspoken, unfiltered, and unbothered. While most Golden Age stars slipped into quiet retirement, Jane cranked up the volume. She gave interviews that often went viral, at least by pre-internet standards. On one local television segment, she called modern movies trash with sound effects. She criticized rising stars for acting like victims instead of women. One host tried to steer her back to polite conversation. Jane doubled down. She also leaned harder into politics. She identified as a proud conservative, supported prayer in schools, and spoke at several Republican events. She criticized Hollywood's moral decay and said most actors today were spoiled and spineless. These statements didn't win her new fans, but they kept her in the press. In 1999, she made headlines again for all the wrong reasons. She was arrested for driving under the influence in California. Her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. At the time, she was in her late 70s. The tabloids pounced. "Busted bombshell," read one headline. She didn't deny it, she didn't spin it, and she definitely didn't apologize in public. Instead, she joked about it later, saying, "At my age, you're lucky to get a story printed about you, even if it's for drinking." Even when called out, she rarely backed down. In one interview, she admitted she didn't believe in political correctness. "I say what I mean, and if you don't like it, turn the channel." No apologies to the end. She passed away in 2011 at the age of 89. True to form, her final years were lived without filters, edits, or apologies. She spent her last decade mostly in Santa Maria, California, staying active in her church and speaking at local events. Neighbors described her as approachable but blunt. If you asked about her past, she'd answer, but she wouldn't sugarcoat it. She didn't do nostalgic interviews. She didn't attend retrospectives. When asked why she skipped award shows or tributes, she said, "I didn't go for applause when I was working. Why would I show up for it now?" In her final interviews, she remained firm in her views. She still rejected modern feminism, still criticized Hollywood's direction, and still defended her early work, even the parts people once called scandalous. "I gave the public what they wanted," she said, "and I did it on my own terms." She also spoke about faith until the end. Church was her real stage, and she liked it that way. She called it the only place that never asked me to be something else. When news of her death broke, the headlines were predictable. Most focused on the outlaw, the hay photo, and her body. Few highlighted her decades of charity work, her fights with censors, or the fact that she'd outlasted most of her peers. Her family didn't issue a long statement. They said she passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by loved ones. No funeral spectacle, no red carpet send-off. And that felt right, because Jane Russell never needed the spotlight. She was the kind of star who took it, then handed it back when she was done. No legacy spin, no last-minute reinvention, just one final act of doing exactly what she always had. Living loud, aging honestly, and refusing to ever play by someone else's script.